started, so you made it to the end. I mean, I'm actually surprised that we have this many people here. So a round of applause for all the people who actually are staying to hear on all the content they can and get everything they can out of this. First, quick introduction. I'm Ben Armstrong. This is Rob Heinemann.
I'm Rob.
So I'm a program manager on the Hyper-V team, and
I'm a program manager on the failover cluster team.
So we've been working together a lot on helping people to upgrade private clouds. We've got a bunch of information to talk about today. However, I do want to be, there are two things I want to just set up front. The first thing is, because both Rob and I have had an incredibly busy week and we knew that this session was coming up last, we decided to be a little bit lame and we're using video demos for this session. So just gonna get that out ahead of time. Yeah, if you want to leave now, it's okay. It's fine. We did, when we were planning this, we actually did figure out that in order to do all the demos live for this, we would need to have 7 clusters configured and ready to go to get all the combinations. And we're like, you know what? Let's just record that in our lab and not risk networking or taking hardware. The second thing to just get up front is, on one hand, we have a huge amount of content. On the other hand, we are going to try and race through it and hit the highlights. We're doing that for 2 reasons. The first one is, come on, it's the last session of the show and you guys are pretty much fried. But the second one is, and not everyone is aware of this, is that this session is meant to go at 12:30 to 1:45, but the hotel shuttles stop at 2. So we're actually going to try and wrap it up a little early so that people have a chance to not have to walk an hour and a half back to their hotel rooms. So please keep that in mind. If you have questions afterwards, love to chat. Don't want to have anyone accidentally miss out on a shuttle and get stranded because of it. So with that, Rob, do you want to do the...
Sure. So our session objectives today, we basically have 3 of them. We want you to understand how to upgrade your private cloud from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2, and from 2012 to 2012 R2, and finally from 2012 R2 to 2016. Now, we broke these up for a reason. So we're thinking that if you can get onto the 2012 R2 platform, then your upgrade story to 2016 is much, much easier. And that's our entire purpose with this presentation. So the first 2/3 of the presentation will be talking about how to get to 2012 R2, and then the last third of the presentation will show you how easy life is. Once you're on 2012 R2, it's really easy to move to 2016.
So before we get on, quick show of hands. How many people here have 2008 R2 Hyper-V clusters in their environment today? Okay, we're going to help you get to 2012 R2. That is our top priority. I'm glad you're here. We want to get you guys to 2012 R2. So how many people are on 2012? Okay, we've got a couple of hands. We're going to be talking through that. How many people are on 2012 R2? Okay, so for the people with 2012 R2, the first half of this session is going to be a recap for you guys. Hang in there for the second half of the session. But that's kind of the rundown that we're going to go through. Rob.
Oh, of course. Sorry. So here are our...
He's busy taking notes. Sorry, we're program managers, so Rob's immediately like, I got to tell this to the development team that the ratios were... We're not going to be super formal because it's last session. It was a little bit of a side note here. It was actually one of the things that when we were putting this session together, we were genuinely unaware ourselves, or we're sitting here going like, what are people going to be running when they come here? And so we're actually really glad we saw the distribution we just did, because we were like, what are we going to do if no one's running 2008 R2? And we've got all these slides on how to upgrade from 2008 R2. Or conversely, what if we're going to spend the first time talking to upgrading to 2016, and we have 3 slides on 2008 R2, and we turn up and everyone's running 2008 R2. So that's why Rob was furiously jutting down
So in terms of the agenda today, we're going to run through some assumptions and set the scene. Then we'll talk about these three phases. So 2008 R2 to 2012 R2, 2012 to 2012 R2, and 2012 R2 to 2016. Okay, Ben, do you want to take us through the assumptions?
You do have to click firmly on the clicker. Okay. The previous person was complaining about the clicker. You just have to click firmly. So a couple of assumptions that we like to go over when we're talking about the upgrade and upgrading your private cloud, because it's just helpful to let you know the frame that we're going to be thinking about as we're talking. So first assumption is we're assuming that you want to upgrade your private cloud. It kind of seems like a no-brainer given the title of the session, but that's really just us saying we're not going to spend any time here and now trying to sell you on why you should be on 2012 R2 and why you should be interested in 2016. We're assuming that all the great sessions that we've had so far this week have achieved that goal, and we are just going to focus on the mechanics of how we get you there. The next thing that we're assuming that you don't want the users of your private cloud to notice it's being upgraded. When we talk to people about the problems around upgrade, and one of the big things that we've spent a lot of time talking to people about is what stops you from upgrading. And one of the big ones we've heard is if upgrading my private cloud means that I have to coordinate downtime among 6 different business groups that use my private cloud, then it just isn't happening. So we're assuming that you want to make the downtime as low as possible, and you want this to be as seamless to the people who use your infrastructure as possible. Similarly, we're assuming that, for the most part, buying new hardware is not a great idea. This was really interesting for us because one of the things when and Rob and I have been, how long have we been working on Upgrade now?
At least 2 years.
For ages. It's just, this has been a large part of our life. And we spent a bunch of time going around and talking to people and being like, okay, tell us what upgrade looks like for you. Tell us how long it takes for you to do an upgrade and what the process is. And what we actually found was that for most people, the thing that just blew out the amount of time it took to do an upgrade was the moment that you needed to get new hardware. And the reason why was okay, most of you guys, you have licensing agreements with Microsoft. Upgrading to the new version is not about software cost. It's about the mechanics of it. However, when you start going okay, well, in order to do this, we need to bring new hardware in. The average figure I've heard from people is that once they get new hardware, that now adds 4 to 8 months to the upgrade process. Because if you want to buy new hardware, then you have to do all the paperwork to justify buying new hardware, and you have to go through the approval process, and then you get into the whole oh, should we really be investing in that sort of hardware? And then you basically have to write a research paper to explain why we should go out and buy 2 new Dell computers. So this is something that really slows things down. So we spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, how can we enable all these scenarios without requiring you to go buy new hardware? We also assume that just because you're upgrading doesn't mean you get a free pass on meeting your customers' SLAs. You have agreements in place, you have customer expectations about uptime, about performance, and just because you're upgrading your private cloud doesn't mean you get a free pass on that. We're also assuming that you want to maintain high availability throughout the upgrade process. And this also comes back to the SLA. And the final assumption that we make is, and this is what we've heard from you guys, is that upgrading guest operating systems is something completely different. If and when guest operating systems get upgraded is done on a different cadence and a different process to that of the private cloud infrastructure. So today we're just going to be focusing on the private cloud infrastructure. Now, next thing to just discuss as an assumption is, for the most part, this is the architecture we're going to be talking about when we talk about upgrade. We're going to be talking about a private cloud where you have system center management, you have Hyper-V compute, and you have a scale-out file server for storage. Now, we do acknowledge that for those of you with 2008 R2 clusters, you don't have the scale-out file server part. You're going to be using a SAN or other block device, most likely with CSV. And we're going to be stepping through that. But for the 2012 R2, 2016, we're going to be focusing on what this looks like if you have a scale-out file server in place. The final thing to call out, and this is just something to acknowledge up front, as we're going to be just assuming this as we go through the rest of the process, is whenever we look at upgrading private cloud infrastructure, there's always an order of operations strategy. And the most important thing to understand is the first thing you upgrade is the management software. And the reason why you do that is you upgrade the management software, and then it will have the capabilities to help you upgrade the rest of the stack. So for instance, going from 2012 to 2012 R2, first you want to upgrade System Center. It can manage both those environments and help you through the process. And it will be a similar deal with going from 2012 R2 to 2016. The next thing to be aware, and let me just open the kimono a bit and explain this. The question here is, once you've upgraded management, do you then upgrade the compute or then the storage? And the reality is we have had many heated arguments amongst the engineering teams about the correct order of operations here. And sometimes even between Rob and myself. Where we've ended up coming with is we're going, okay, our public position is it doesn't really matter. You can do one, then the other. You can actually do them both at the same time if you really want to. There are some minor pros and cons either way. The reality is the way we've designed these compute and storage layers, we fully support operating them at different version levels. So there's no huge implication to upgrading one first or then the other. So Rob, you want to step us through the next couple of slides?
Yeah, sure.
In fact, let me give you the clicker.
Thank you. Okay, so here in this slide, you can see we've outlined some of the key capabilities of private cloud throughout the 4 releases that we want to talk about. So our story keeps getting better and better with time. And a lot of it is thanks to your feedback. So again, in terms of this presentation, we're going to be talking about, first of all, how you move from 2008 R2 2 versions up to 2012 R2. Then we'll talk about 2012 to 2012 R2 migration for management, compute, and storage. And then we'll talk about what the future looks like and how we upgrade from a 2012 R2 private cloud all the way up to 2016. So as you can see, there are a lot of exciting new features in 2016. And there have been previous sessions. I encourage you to have a look at them. Storage Spaces Direct, Storage Replica, the Nano Server, Windows Server Containers.
Lots of exciting stuff. It's
nice.
A big release.
And finally, our feature, which is at the very bottom, Cluster OS rolling upgrade.
You have to really press firmly on it.
Oh, but you have to be careful there. All right, okay, so this slide is our framework slide. So you can see that we have management, compute, and storage, and we'll be talking about these capabilities and tools as we move forward in each story. So the first story really is 2008 R2 to 2012 R2, then the second story, 2012 to 2012 R2, and finally 2012 R2 to 2016.
And there are really a couple of big things to kind of call out from this. This is a really useful slide just to set the stage for what technologies you have available. But the 2 big things to call out here, the first one is just to highlight that like, I love this slide because it really represents that, like, with every release, we have been investing more and more and more in providing the tools and infrastructure for upgrading your private cloud and making this as great as possible. The second thing is, like, I feel fairly comfortable saying that, like, yes, and in the future there's probably going to be another column which is going to have even more features where we talk about, like, how we've continued to make this better. Sorry.
Okay, so, all right. So in this section, we'll be talking about moving from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2. So I'm going to highlight, this is our story here. And first, let's talk about compute. So,
No, you've got management.
Right. I promise you I've had my coffee. Okay.
Do I need to go get you another one?
No, I should be okay. You don't want me dangerously caffeinated here. All right. So we're talking about management. 2008 R2 to 2012 R2. Okay. So our premise is if you can upgrade the System Center components first, then you can use them ideally to orchestrate the compute and storage migrations further downstream. So let's have just a quick show of hands. How many of you are using System Center components? Okay, great news. All right,
Good
so
stuff.
this will go quickly. All right. So first question is, when you're upgrading the management pieces of your private cloud, a huge question that we have is how important is it to maintain high availability of these components during the upgrade process? In other words, will your users notice if you have a brief period of unavailability for a component during upgrade, right? And so, so we're thinking that a lot of times a user won't notice. A lot of times these steps can be done on a weekend or in an evening, during evening hours, during downtime or regular maintenance windows.
Yeah, so the key thing is, as long as you can keep the virtual machines running, so great examples, System Center Virtual Machine Manager, if you're using that yourself to manage the cloud, if you shut that down for an hour for an upgrade, then your customers are still going to use your virtual machines. They're not going to notice. Another example is, you have DPM running in your environment and it's providing backups. Well, if you need to shut that down for an hour to upgrade DPM, once again, your users aren't going to notice that. So we view these as acceptable downtimes in the upgrade process.
Right. And so when it comes to upgrading your System Center components from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2, a lot of times you can't do it all in one step. You have to do it in multiple steps. So I've outlined here the three major steps of going from 2008 R2 to 2012, then 2012 to 2012 Service Pack 1, 2012 Service Pack 1 to 2012 R2. And so by reading these guides and by navigating that process, you can actually migrate all of your components successfully. But it takes preparation, and it's something that you should plan on investing in order to achieve a smooth upgrade. Now, some hints for you, are briefly, especially when it comes to SCVMM, is to configure SCVMM with a separate database server. So you keep your SQL Server on a separate machine, and then you can upgrade SQL Server independently of SCVMM. So you can sort of break out those two upgrade cycles. So in terms of upgrading SCVMM, when you have a detached implementation, then it's quite easy to basically really just power down SCVMM on one set of VMs and then power it up on another set of VMs and attach it to the database. And then there's a database upgrade process that will occur.
Yeah, and this is just a tip for, and actually as an overall thing for the 2008 to 2012 R2, a lot of the stuff we're going to be discussing is tips about how you can plan this to minimize the downtimes in the process. Because a lot of these upgrade processes, they're the sort of things that, yeah, if you go and shut down the entire system and then start reading what you need to do, you're going to have, a good couple of hours of downtime. Whereas if you can plan it and be very deliberate up ahead, a lot of the times you can have the downtime be in the vicinity of a couple of minutes.
Right. And testing is also very important. If you have the capability to test migration of these components and verify the steps for yourself ahead of time, then often you can get an idea of what the exact timings are going to be like for your environment. So specifically, how large your databases are, how long they will take to attach and detach if necessary, how long they take to back up and restore if necessary. So you get a firm idea. So I always encourage a test pass as well when that's possible. Okay. Now, let's move on to compute from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2. And this brings us to Hyper-V export-import. This is the Swiss Army knife, the general utility for all VMs in this class. And this is just a great utility, a great fallback. I'm sure if I ask for a show of hands, everyone has used VM export, VM import, and so this is a tool that you know. But what I'm trying to say is don't forget about it. This is a great little tool for 2008 R2.
Yeah, and it's actually worth highlighting. For this session, we're very focused on the tooling around private cloud and around doing this in clustered environments. A number of times I have people come up at the end of these sessions and be like, that was really great, but I have standalone compute nodes as well. What should I be doing there? And the thing that I am always telling people is we spend huge amounts of time making sure in-place upgrade works, and it works really well with Hyper-V. And so if anyone has a standalone node that they need to upgrade, either just doing an in-place upgrade or exporting virtual machines and then just reattaching them on the other side is a really rock-solid process to go through.
Okay, and this brings us to our next tool for compute, which is the Copy Cluster Role Wizard.
So actually, let's just pause for a moment. How many people here have actually used the Copy Cluster Role Wizard in their environment? Okay, for those who haven't, this is possibly the most underrated tool we have in our toolkit. So I love this.
Okay, so here we go. So this is the Copy Cluster Role Wizard, and it's almost stealthy how well it's hidden down in the Failover Cluster Manager UI. But it starts here. It's a handy little tool. It's used for migration, and it can be used for consolidation as well. So let's have a quick look. There we go. So you run the Copy Cluster Role Wizard from the cluster that you're moving things onto. And basically, you can reach down either one level or two levels, two versions of the OS back. And it will then look for roles that can be migrated, and it will migrate them, or it will copy them over from the old cluster to the new cluster. And what that means is it copies roles. It'll copy the cluster roles. A VM is a cluster role. And so are disks, for example. So, and actually I'll show you exactly how that works. The mechanics go like this, that from the new cluster or the target cluster, as long as the storage is shared between the two clusters, then it's very easy and very quick to actually move roles. So we actually don't copy any of the data. So when you're moving a VM, for example, we don't copy any of the VHD or VHDX at all. What we do copy is we copy the registry settings that comprise the cluster role from one cluster to the next. And we assume that you're going to reuse your storage on your new cluster. And that's what makes it actually a pretty fast tool. So although there's downtime associated with this tool, we say it's minimal downtime because it can be pretty quick. And I'll give you a demonstration of that in just a moment. Okay, so let's walk through how this would actually work in practice. So imagine you have this 2-node Hyper-V cluster with 6 VMs on it, and it's attached to some storage here. The way this would work is you would create a new cluster. So a new cluster magically appears, and it's a 2-node cluster. You're sharing the same storage. You would use the copy cluster role wizard to populate the VMs over there, and in this state, the old VMs are running and the new VMs are stopped. And then you come to this phase where you actually have to stop the old VMs, and then you basically want to unmask storage from the old cluster, remask it for the new cluster, and then online the VMs on the new cluster. The worst thing that could possibly happen is if you're running the VM on both clusters at the same time, right? You don't want to do that. That's why we talk a lot about masking and unmasking. And finally, you just can disconnect storage when you're all done and reuse those machines.
Now, something to highlight, the little diagram we've shown you was someone with a 2-node cluster bringing in 2 extra nodes. And we use that because there's a trade-off there about, do I bring in new hardware or do I maintain high availability? So by bringing in 2 extra nodes, you maintain high availability except for the actual switchover point. Now, I have talked to many customers who wanted to upgrade a 2 or 3 node cluster, and what they actually did was they evacuated one of the nodes in their 2008 R2 clusters, ejected it, created a new cluster, and moved it across. Now, that gave them the benefit of no new hardware, and that's certainly a supported way to do it. It has the downside that for the entire migration, you are not highly available. So there's a trade-off here in this case.
Right. It could be, we could have split the cluster, but then you'd lose high availability for a period of time. And also, sometimes you want to migrate only a subset of the VMs. In fact, let's roll this video, and let me show you the copy cluster role wizard. Okay. All right. So here, this is my source cluster and my target cluster. I run the copy cluster role wizard, and I move a couple of VMs over there. I offline the VMs on the old cluster, online them on the new cluster. So let's see how this works. So actually, I'm using remote desktop connection to this is my source cluster, 2008 R2, with its wonderful UI. You can see I have 4 VMs running there, and I'm running them all on CSV. So now this is real time. I haven't actually sped anything up here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I just want to show you that this is my target cluster. And my target cluster currently has no VMs, right? It's also a 2-node cluster. And now I'm going to find, down in more actions, the copy cluster role wizard. Let's fire it up. And so it's kind of this nice step-by-step process. First, I'm going to type in the name of the source cluster, and then it's going to find it out there, hopefully. So it finds it, it does some analysis, it looks over at the cluster roles. Now watch this. This wizard works on a LUN by LUN or volume by volume basis. So if I only want VM4 or VM2, I can't have it, right? Everything on that LUN comes over or it doesn't. So LUN by LUN basis. So here I'm going to take VM1 and VM2. The wizard sees that I'm moving VMs. So it asks me questions. It's going to attempt to fix things up for me so that those VMs are ready to run on the new cluster. Okay, so here we go. It's ready. It's built me this beautiful report. Look at that. So it's telling me what it's done, what it's going to do, right? So it's talking about all the steps that it's taking as a wizard to basically copy those VMs and put them over there in the new cluster. So I push the button, and voila, there are my VMs. Notice that they are stopped. I'm not going to online them yet because, very important, I have to go over to the source cluster and offline them over there.
And the key thing is, up until this stage, the VMs are actually still running. This is the biggest mistake I see people make when they're doing this sort of migration, is they start by shutting down the VMs. And you don't have to do that until right at this step.
Right. So we're going to watch the downtime right now. So now we have downtime, right? So you don't have downtime while the wizard is actually running. You have downtime right here when you're shutting the VMs down. So I'm shutting these two VMs down, and then actually I'm going to go through some extreme phases here. I'm going to show you how paranoid I am. I'm actually going to go and offline the CSV disk and remove it from CSV, and then, of course, to do it properly, I'd go to my storage management tool and I'd unmask that disk, that volume. So just so that there's no risk of running the two VMs at the same time, or the VMs on the two clusters at the same time. That's why I'm going through all these extreme steps. So we're just going to remove it. Yep. Now, of course, I've backed these things up carefully, so if there was any problem, right, I could restore from my backup. And even available storage, I'll just kick this disk right out of the cluster. So, which is totally safe, because if I want to come...
And the key thing is, none of these operations are actually destructive. They're just unregistering those virtual machines and that storage with the source cluster.
Exactly. And now I'm going to go and online I online the disk first in the target cluster, and then I'm ready to online my two VMs. So my downtime, my total downtime for these two VMs is really the time it takes me to offline the VMs and offline the disk, do the masking that I need to do, online the disk, and then online the VMs. And it's right here, and I can tell you, in this case, these two VMs, it's 2 minutes.
So yeah, in a well-planned migration from 2008 R2 to 2012 R2, the downtime is almost always under 10 minutes.
Right. So again, the VHD files, the VHDX files are not actually moving, right? They remain on that one disk. It's just the way we really transfer the disk and the roles to the other cluster. And here you can see we're up and going.
You guys fix the issues with if they were SCVDM created VMs?
We're
Do the cluster right?
actually we're still looking at that issue. So
That was my big headache.
that is a pain point, yes.
So now that we've talked about that, I'll take over and talk about, okay, what does the 2012 to 2012 R2 process look like? Before I do that, though, there is one thing I'd like to just add to the 2008 to 2012 R2 process. The process that we just stepped you through was basically keeping your architecture exactly the same. So it wasn't moving to a scale-out file server. You're still using CSV. You're still using a disk. Now, if you're wanting to look at moving to a scale-out file server, what I would actually recommend is that you actually follow the process that we just showed you to get onto 2012 R2 with your CSV volume, because once you're there, you then have technologies like storage migration and shared nothing live migration that will make it really easy to then go on and make storage changes with zero downtime. So 2012 to 2012 R2. That's this nice little slice here. And this was when we started investing more and more in the upgrade path. So I'm not going to talk about the areas that Rob touched on. So for instance, I'm not going to talk about management. Obviously, you still need to upgrade your management stack first. You need to upgrade System Center first. It is worth noting, and I have had some customers who have wanted to do this, that the export-import path that we discussed and the copy cluster roles wizard process both continue to work for 2012 to 2012 R2, like we've just shown you. So as I said, I have had customers who are like, you know what, we're familiar with these tools, we know how they work, we have tooling and infrastructure around them, we're going to continue to use them. I'm going to focus on what are the new technologies that are available for this path. So the first thing is, this was the first time that we did cross-version live migration. So the great thing about cross-version live migration is there's no VM downtime. It's a very simple and straightforward thing to do. However, much like the copy cluster role wizard, it does require that you have a destination cluster or server that you're going to. So for And the other thing is, and this is one of the reasons why we've had some people go with a copy cluster role wizard, is it does move a lot of data over the network. So if you look at a really large deployment, if you do a live migration for it, you are moving all the data over the network, all the memory of those running virtual machines over the network. Whereas with copy cluster role, there's actually no data that gets transferred over the network. So I've had some customers who are like, you know what, like we are at close to peak capacity on our network, and I really don't want to contemplate the idea of trying to move all this stuff across. I'd actually rather shut down the VMs, use the copy cluster role, have a bit of downtime, but the overall process will be quicker. So that's kind of the trade-off there. So here, the process that we discussed for 2012 to 2012 R2 looks quite different. So taking a larger example cluster, I have an 8-node 2012 cluster, and I want to upgrade it. What we can do is we can drain the roles off of some of those nodes. We can evict them, create a new cluster, and then we can start to use cross-version live migration to move virtual machines across in batches one at a time, and just rinse and repeat this process as we can move nodes across. Now, just like the 2008 R2 to 2012 R2, there are some options and some trade-offs here. If you have enough cluster nodes, obviously you can go through and do a process like this. If you are running smaller clusters, then you're going to need to ask yourself the question about, okay, do I bring in some extra hardware for the migration process, or do I have periods of time when I'm running a single node cluster and just risk the availability? So for instance, in this flow, I started by pulling 2 nodes out and moving them across. I know I've had customers where they evacuated 1 node, created a 1-node cluster to bring it across, and did the live migration. And it wasn't until they moved the 2nd node across that they had true high availability in the destination cluster. So this goes through. So the reality of this process, when we look at 2012 to 2012 R2, this is the first time that we can actually do this process with zero downtime. It is a very complicated process to follow. And that's one of the big things that we invested in the 2016 upgrade, was making this whole process easier. But talking to customers, we've had a number of customers who've gone through this process, and I'd like to highlight that System Center does an excellent job of helping orchestrate this process. So this is one where there needs to be careful planning and consideration. So I've just talked about the virtual machine side of things. Rob, do you want to step us through the storage side for 2012 to 2012 R2?
Sure. So it turns out that there's this lovely tool called Move Virtual Machine Storage, also in the Failover Cluster Manager UI.
But to be clear, this is something we introduced in 2012.
Yes.
So if you're in the 2008 R2 to 2012, this isn't there.
Correct. So this is available to you, and this is a great tool. Again, it's kind of buried in there, but many customers use this tool to move between storage architectures. And in this case, you can use it to move between storage configurations, between versions of the cluster. So let me show you how that would work theoretically. So imagine that you have here 2 clusters, and you're using storage pools. If you have the hardware available to you, then it's very easy actually to move the storage from one cluster with storage to another cluster with storage. Now the problem with this technique is this assumes that you have a second set of hardware and that you can do this, that it's easy to you, that it's just available for you. So if that's your scenario though, this is a great utility for you, and it's really that simple.
Yep.
So now, it's more likely, however, that you won't have such a simple life, and that there's there is another way, another couple of ways actually, to slice the cake. And let's talk about migrating your storage pools. So using this technique, assuming that you don't have new hardware, but you do have storage space, there's another way to go. So basically, you can split the cluster and then migrate storage using Move Virtual Machine Storage. And then finally, you destroy the old cluster. So let me just show you, walk you through how that would work. So if you start here, for example, what you can do is you can split that cluster up by moving a couple of nodes out of the cluster. Right? So you still have high availability, but it's perhaps less failover capacity. Then you basically drain one pool at a time. So assuming that you have 25% capacity in your storage pools, you drain one pool off at a time, then migrate it over live using Move Virtual Machine Storage. And then you can basically light up those VMs. You can do a live migration then and light up the VMs on the new cluster. Then you do the same thing for pool 3 and pool 4 until finally you reach this state where your pools are all over there, right? One pool at a time. And then finally you can basically offline your old storage cluster and move those machines over, and you're done. And so essentially we've achieved that with no downtime, but with the assumption that you have spare capacity in your storage pool. Okay, finally, one more technique for you, and that's upgrading your storage pool in place, but with downtime. So again, we're going to use the copy cluster role wizard. So in this scenario, what we're going to do is we're going to prepare for the migration by again, splitting the node, splitting the cluster. Then we're going to migrate using the copy cluster role wizard. And finally, we're going to cut across and bring the machines over. Let me show you how that would work. So starting here with this configuration. So here we have 2 nodes and 3 pools. Now what we're going to sacrifice this time, assuming we have no hardware, we're going to sacrifice availability. So we're going to pull one node out of the cluster, form a 1-node cluster. Then we're going to take some downtime at this point. You were going to use the copy cluster role wizard to basically move those pools like this. So again, there was this downtime window while those pools were offline, but it was brief, very brief, probably, right? And then we can spin those pools back up, and then since it's running, then we just bring that other cluster node in. And finally, we have high availability here. So again, you can see the set of trade-offs where we had to sacrifice availability and also take some minimal downtime, but it's a strategy that's worked for some customers before.
So before we jump over to the video, let's just kind of put a bow around this. When we look at compute and storage upgrade from 2012 to 2012 R2, there are really 3 different options on the table, each of which have their different trade-offs. The first option is that you can use our live migration, storage migration technologies combined with the whole technique of evicting nodes from compute and storage cluster and splitting resources and moving them across. Now, the great thing about this is it does mean it is possible to do a 0 downtime upgrade without needing any new hardware. But in 2012 to 2012 R2, that is a very finicky process. It takes a lot of planning, and frankly, you're going to want to practice that a couple of times. That said, when we were developing 2012 R2, we had a number of setups in our labs where we were able to take 2-node Hyper-V cluster on 2-node storage cluster on a single piece of storage underneath and successfully, repeatedly upgrade that without bringing in any new hardware. So if that's a strict requirement for you, then that path is available. That said, we do know that we have 2 other options that many of our customers have been choosing. The first option is, yes, this all gets easier if you do bring in new hardware. If you bring in new hardware for 2012 to 2012 R2, you don't have to do all the orchestration around evicting and joining and splitting and recreating. You can just do live migration and storage migration, and it's nice and simple. The third one is that you can simplify the process if you're willing to accept a bit of downtime. So those are kind of the three things. There are a lot of possibilities here, but what's really interesting is how we're moving this forward with 2012 R2 to 2016. So, with 2012 R2, 2012 to 2012 R2, we were really, first time we started focusing on how to do this with zero downtime. 2012 R2 to 2016, we're now really going after, let's make this easy. Let's make it so that this is something that people can just do. And the biggest investment here, and this has been a huge amount of work from so many teams, is supporting ClusterOS rolling upgrade. And this has been, this is all about trying to get away from the, you have to split off, create a new cluster, move across, do all that orchestration yourself, and making this a nice, simple, easy process that is much easier to orchestrate, much easier to plan. So Rob, do you actually want to step us through some of the underlying work that's gone on the clustering side here?
Yeah, sure. So, and thanks, Ben, for introducing the feature, because we got a lot of feedback on the previous techniques that we discussed. And yes, we wanted to make this much easier. So the way that ClusterOS rolling upgrade works, you start with a 2012 R2 failover cluster. So the previous techniques we've talked about will hopefully bring you to this point. So whether it's management, compute, or storage, we start here. Now, it's a fairly straightforward process. It's iterative. So on a node-by-node basis, you select a node and you drain the workload off that node. You then evict the node from the cluster. Next, a clean OS install, meaning you format the system drive and you put 2016 on that cluster node. Next, you rejoin that node back to the cluster. And this is actually where the first piece of the new feature. So an up-level node can now join a 2012 R2 cluster. So this is the first piece. And basically, the 2016 node knows that it should join the cluster and use the down-level cluster protocols. So down-level heart beating, down-level GUM protocols. OK. And at this point, it's a fully functional node. You can push workload back onto it. So VM live migration works great. Moving your file shares works great. And actually, it works bidirectionally.
Yep.
Thanks to Ben's team. OK. And then you do this, we say iteratively or rinse and repeat again and again for each node. And it takes me about an hour per node to do this. And then finally, you reach this point where all of your nodes are now at 2016. At this point in time, we haven't changed the cluster at all. Right? At this point in time, we can still go backwards. We can add 2012 R2 nodes into this cluster. We can...
You could actually roll back the whole darn thing. And this was actually a big thing that we looked at, and we wanted to make a capability in the platform. Because we spent a lot of time looking at this and going like, OK, what's holding people back from upgrading? And there were two things that popped out at us when we looked at the 2012 to 2012 R2 path. The first one, obviously, is we were like, wow, there are a lot of steps here, and we need to make this a lot easier. And that's where rolling cluster upgrade comes into place. But the second thing was, I mean, this is one of those awkward, by the way, I like asking awkward questions. So let's ask an awkward question. How many people here have had the experience where they upgraded to a new version of Windows Server and they thought everything looked good, only 2 weeks later to discover that there was a driver issue with one of their devices and that they had to wait for a new driver to come out for the latest version of Windows? Yeah, we got a number of hands.
Awkward.
So this happens, and I've heard customer reports of this happening. So the great thing is, what we're enabling here is you can actually upgrade your entire cluster, get every node running the next version of Windows Server, and then you can just test it for a bit. You can make sure that everything's okay. And if you found an issue like that, you contact the vendor and they're like, yeah, we're working on a driver, but it won't be out for 3 months. Then you can actually roll the entire thing back. And that was a big thing that we wanted to make sure of, was we wanted to be able to provide a high guarantee about, look, if anything goes wrong in the process, we can roll back, we can get you back to where you are. And that rollback is also a zero downtime event. So you can upgrade every node and then roll every node back, zero downtime to your workloads.
Right. And once you're ready, once you've run in this mode for a while and you've checked your drivers and your driver vendors and things, and you're ready to cross the point of no return, then there's a single PowerShell commandlet, no parameters, update cluster functional level, and it just will first check that all the nodes are at 2016, and then it goes through a 3-phase process that takes about 5 seconds, and it will bump you up to the next functional level.
Yeah, but it is really important to understand this is a point of no return. You know, once you do this, you can't roll back anymore.
Not easily, right. I mean, theoretically, if you cross the point of no return, if you typed update cluster functional level, and then you decided that for some reason you wanted to go backwards, theoretically you could
there are ways, but
destroy the cluster, restore it from a backup, right?
Yeah.
You could put 2012 R2 nodes, but that's
let's just say
a lot of work. So, okay, so, and then it's really that easy. You're just done.
And great things about this is knowing your cluster names, very simple process of just doing one node at a time. You don't have to do any reconfiguration on cluster roles. It all just works.
Right. So the same settings work. Your cluster access points are still the same. The implementation is very straightforward. We added a cluster functional level property. We enabled the 2016 nodes to join 2012 R2 clusters in down-level compatibility mode. And we have this one commandlet, which is the point of no return, we call it. And
we should alias that commandlet to point of no return.
Point of no return, we should. It's probably copyrighted by somebody. I don't know. But I should have thought about that.
Set cluster point of no return.
There we go. I like it. Okay. And really, it's just that simple. So we are ready now to talk about how we apply Cluster OS rolling upgrade to the management, compute, and storage elements in your private cloud. Ben, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks. So the first thing is we've been working with the System Center team through a lot of the work that we've been doing on rolling cluster upgrade. So the great thing is System Center Virtual Machine Manager now supports HA itself as a platform. The VMs that are running System Center can be upgraded using Cluster OS rolling upgrade. The SQL servers can be upgraded. And we're really happy about this. The System Center guys are also going to be delivering orchestration for the whole rolling cluster upgrade process for the compute layer as well. And so coming back to, we talked earlier on, you want to upgrade your management layer first, and this is absolutely the case here. You're going to come in, you're going to use this technology to upgrade your System Center Virtual Machine Manager. You can then have it look at your infrastructure and say, okay, I want to upgrade this cluster. And one, it's going to do that for you. And two, if you want to go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to upgrade half the nodes and run in mixed mode while I test this out, all the functionality of System Center Virtual Machine Manager continues to work while you're in that mixed mode process. So having talked about management, just to take a moment to drop down into and we've talked about management, we've talked about rolling cluster upgrade. What are some of the mechanics behind Hyper-V that we're doing for this scenario, and what are some of the things to be aware of there? So the big thing to understand is we're now supporting VM live migration in both directions when it's cross-version. 2012 to 2012 R2, we only supported one direction. 2012 R2, Windows Server 2016, you can live migrate up, you can live migrate down. And we have bidirectional support for pretty much everything. So we have bidirectional support for safe state, for checkpoint. A big one that we've heard a lot of feedback for is actually replica. So if you're using Hyper-V Replica and you want to go and upgrade either side, you can now do that independently. You don't have an order dependency issue there. So you can maybe upgrade your DR site and try things out there, or maybe you're going to upgrade your primary site but keep your DR site down level. All these things will continue to work. Now, the way we've done this, by the way, is by introducing the idea of a virtual machine version, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So, if you look at the compute cluster, you'll go through the process that Rob just discussed, where you're going to be evicting nodes, you're going to be upgrading them, and you're going to be running in this mode. And you get to the end, and you upgrade to the cluster functional level to 2016. Something to be really clear about, though, is that upgrading the cluster functional level to 2016 does not upgrade your virtual machines. What it does is it basically unlocks the new capabilities in Hyper-V, where one of those new capabilities is the ability to upgrade your virtual machine configuration. So before you upgrade the cluster functional level, if you go to Hyper-V and you say, oh, can you take that virtual machine and make it a version 6.2 virtual machine, we will actually say no. No, you cannot, because I am running in a cluster with 2012 R2 nodes, and I may be asked to move any of these virtual machines back. So we will not let you do that upgrade. Now, once you have upgraded the cluster functional level, we will let you upgrade virtual machines, but we do not require you to. So there's an important difference to understand here. On the clustering side of things, and for a number of the different technologies for clustering, we are going to be providing guidance where we say, hey, you can run in mixed mode for a couple of weeks, but we want you to upgrade the cluster functional level within a reasonable amount of time. For the virtual machine version, we are going out and saying, you can run at the 2012 R2 version for as long as you need to run. And we're doing that for a couple of reasons. The first reason is we understand that a lot of people have multiple clusters in their environment. In fact, let's do a show of hands. How many people here have more than one cluster in their environment? Okay, great. So another show of hands. How many of you with multiple clusters in your environments upgrade every cluster at the same time? What? No one? I'm shocked. So we understand this. So you're going to upgrade a cluster. You're going to want the ability to move virtual machines between clusters still. You're going to want to be able to back up and restore virtual machines between clusters. You're going to want to have all those paths. You're going to want to be able to use replica between the different cluster environments. So we're going to support that in an ongoing basis. So these are two very different operations with very different support statements. So with all that said, do you want to switch across?
Sure.
And I'll let Rob talk through this video because he was kind enough to get these videos all put together for us.
Okay, quite easy. So short video here. What we're going to do is I'm going to demonstrate how I take this 2012 R2 cluster. I'm going to extend it by adding in these 2012-16 clusters, do a live migration over. So this is an up-level live migration. Then I'm just going to cut these two nodes out. So I have prepared these two machines ahead of time because we don't want to watch.
Here's one we put in the oven earlier.
Exactly. So very much like a baking show or a DIY show, we're saying, let's see how we do this. So the first piece of the feature is here. So add cluster node. Of course, you can do this from the UI too. What you'll see in a moment is you'll see that the new node come in to the cluster. So there it is. So add cluster node takes about 20 seconds. I do this quite frequently.
Yeah, how many times do we create and destroy clusters on a daily
man.
basis?
Oh man, it's fun. And so then we're going to put this other node into the cluster. So, and again, these could be machines that you've just imaged from sysprep or something.
And I mean, in real life, you would have started with a 4-node cluster, removed and reinstalled and so on. And as fun as it would have been to have had this video be nothing but us, just like an hour of us reinstalling operating systems, we thought we'd skip over that.
I wanted to share that one, but Ben wouldn't let me.
Would have made the talking a lot easier. We would just hit the video and then sat down.
There we go. But so I kind of go through some pains to say, see, look, here the VM is running, and I'm running SQL Server in the VM, and it's doing important transactions, as we're going to live migrate this thing over. So now then the live migration. So I'm going to pick, of course, an up-level node. How about vNext A over there? And then again, the live migration of this SQL Server over my massive 1 gigabit network. Takes only a few seconds.
Nothing but the best hardware for PMs.
And voila, you can see it's still running. My important business there is still running. So no maintenance window for my business. And then finally, I just want to show what we're going to do next is we're going to drain the 2 old nodes. So basically pause drain, basically move all the cluster resources off there. If there's a cluster group is on there, or if there's any disks that those nodes own, just doing a pause drain will just move that right out. So it's actually the longest part of the demonstration here is this node is.
Yeah, this is fun because inevitably, one of these nodes always owns the cluster WMI interface. So you get the little blip in the UI as we drain it across.
Yeah. Now, also, I should point out that I've been a good citizen in making this video. This is all shot from my laptop, which is running the Windows 10 client and the new remote server administration tools. So I don't actually need to remote desktop to those machines at all. I'm doing this all from the server manager, and then I fired up the failover cluster manager here and connected it up to my.
And actually, since you've mentioned that, it's also worth highlighting. This whole process of doing the rolling cluster OS upgrade needs to be done from failover cluster manager on server 2016 or Windows 10. You can't do it from the 2012 R2 side.
Right, please, that's a great point. Please do this only from the 2016 node. And so finally, we're ready here now to check. So I want to show you the cluster functional level property. So here I'm just querying the cluster. Again, this is remotely, which is kind of nice. So it tells me that I'm at level 8, which means 2012 R2. Now, are you ready for it? This is where you need to do the drum roll, Ben. And you gotta, okay, so this is the.
I may have seen this work too many times to be excited.
Well, come on. So 1, 2, bingo. We're done. So that's it.
Nice, simple, and
Kind
not
of cool.
complicated.
Kind of cool.
Yeah.
So, that was easy.
You need to get a "that was easy" button. You should just put that in the UI.
I should.
So, Rob, do you want to step us through what this looks like for storage?
Sure. So, no surprises. Cluster OS rolling upgrade for storage looks very similar to management, very similar to compute. It's the same exact technique. So here is a screenshot of, this is a scale-out file server. How many of you have used a scale-out file server, SMB3? Do we have any fans in the audience? Yeah. So, all right, a few of you. The rest of you, we will eventually convert you.
We'll get you over. Though we're going to be talking through scale-out file server. We should call out that the rolling cluster upgrade process works both for scale-out file server and for CSV. So while we want you all on scale-out file server, for those of you who are using CSV, we've got you covered as well.
Right. So the first scenario I showed you was a CSV cluster, all one cluster. We rolled that one. Okay. Now, again, no big surprise here. You start out with 2012 R2. You've got some SMB client machines connecting up to you. Those purple boxes, that could be Hyper-V, that could be SQL Server, that could be any other application that's using the SMB3 protocol. Okay. And it's pretty simple. So basically, we pick a node. Hello? We pick a node, drain it, which causes the file pointers or the file shares to move over. And then eventually we have upgraded every node, we run, update cluster functional level, and we're done. And so you arrive at this state, and it's that easy.
Yep.
Okay,
You want to run the
Sure.
video for that?
let's do it. All right. Okay, so here in this video, this is a double roll. So we start out with two clusters, a compute cluster and a scale-out file server cluster. I extend the compute cluster by adding in the two 2016 nodes. Then I do a live migration of both VMs over to 2012 or 2016. Then next, I extend the scale-out file server cluster and I push it up. Right? I run the two clusters in mixed mode briefly before I cut the old nodes out of the clusters and upgrade them. So this is a kind of an interesting scenario, this double roll. I'm going to show you double roll with no downtime. So it's kind of cool. Again, the feature first shows its head here at add cluster node. Again, another 20 minutes. Now I know what you're all thinking, like, who taught this guy how to type? So that would be.
This is why whenever I do demos, I actually fill my clipboard full of all the stuff I need to type in.
But so thank
Low
you.
PowerShell demo tip, by the way, because we use this extensively in ours. There's actually a command line tool for putting stuff in the clipboard. It's called Clip. And if you do write host text, pipe it into Clip, then it magically appears in your clipboard.
Well, now I know.
Yeah, I use it in all my demos because I'm the worst typer in the world.
Okay. All right, so here I'm just showing you that we've added these two nodes to the Hyper-V cluster, and I'm ready to do the live migrations of both the VMs. So the live migrations are going to take about 20 seconds each to move over. And again, this is on my really awesome 1 gigabyte network cluster.
High-end hardware.
And here I'm just showing you that, look, see, my VM's still working because the CPU's still ticking. And next, I'm going to move my SQL Server VM over, and it's running my really important workload. So I've got some transactions running in there. And one thing we don't demonstrate is the down-level live migration. I could basically at this point in time change my mind and say, okay, you know, actually I want that one on this other node, which is a 2012 R2 node, and I can bring it back. So these clusters are fully functional. So here you can see my workload's still running there. We're still in business, still selling stuff. Now I'm switching over to the scale-out file server cluster, and we're going to add a couple of nodes. So again, I know you're wondering who taught me typing. And my apologies to my typing teacher. That would be Mrs. Caputo, who is a wonderful person.
I'm sure she's watching right now.
If you're out there in the audience, thank you. She'll be contacting me. Great days.
And so something to highlight with the scale-out file server, we have rolling cluster upgrade for all the storage stacks. So not just the SMB, but for storage spaces, for NTFS, for REFS, for the whole 9 yards.
Data deduplication.
For data deduplication, you can have all the storage bells and whistles enabled. It all works with rolling cluster upgrade of your storage cluster.
I wanted to show you that it looks, you might have noticed that the cluster icons changed. The cluster does make note that you're entering a mixed mode by, this is event 1548, says, hey, you've entered mixed mode. Will you please complete your upgrade of this cluster? So it kind of nags you a little bit, kind of gives you this little nudge, right? But you can run in mixed mode for 2 weeks to 4 weeks. We do ask you not to run in mixed mode on a permanent basis. All right, now we're about ready to we've just moved the file shares, and I'm just showing you that it's all still running. Moving those file shares was really fast.
And these were the file shares that these virtual machines were running off of through this whole process.
See, so I'm showing you, see, look, everything's working still. Here's VM1, and it's still clicking along. My utilization went up there for some reason, but
Got stuff running in the VM.
yep, it's still running. And now we're about ready to have some fun here. We're going to do the next step. We're going to drain the old machines. So pause drain. And then we're going to cut them out of the cluster. So I know this is a lot of fun, watching these nodes drained and evict. It's fun for me.
It's exciting for us because
But
it actually works.
I wanted to make this video realistic and just show you, without speeding anything up, actually how long it does take to upgrade a cluster. And it can be this fast. It can take you 8 minutes to do a double roll like this.
So with when you go from 2012 to 2016, you do recommend upgrading the compute layer first, then the storage?
No. It's a huge argument amongst the team. We do not make a recommendation. No recommendation. If I even tipped my hand to recommend one layer first over the other, then I'm just choosing who's going to be in my office with pitchforks when I get back to Redmond. We are neutral. You can upgrade one, then the other. You can do both at the same time. No recommendation. To people watching online,
Okay, so
I'm innocent.
that took 5 seconds. So, and there was no outage.
Yeah.
When
And the key thing here is, like, regardless of the upgrade process, we support having a 2016 storage cluster with a 2012 R2 compute cluster. We support having a 2012 R2 storage cluster with a 2016 compute cluster. These are all supported configurations.
Don't get us in trouble. Okay, and so again here, I'm down in the scale-out file server, and I'm just draining nodes. So I'm draining the old nodes, moving the cluster access point and any other resources it has, moving any disk that it happens to own, like a witness disk, for example. Basically pausing draining, kicking out the other ones, and then you'll see in a moment. So evicts are pretty fast, about 10 seconds. Then we're going to go back out here, and we'll do the same exact set of operations. And again, you'll ask yourself, who was my typing teacher? And so here we go. So first, we're just going to query, say, hey, cluster, what's your functional level?
No, it looks like you're just going to upgrade.
No.
No, you're going to query. Yep.
So it's 8. That means 2012 R2. Then we're going to upgrade this thing. So wait for the yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
There we go.
Of course. So we've done this several thousand times now, and I
Yes,
have
we really
yet to
have.
see an issue. So I encourage you all to please try it with the preview bits. I would love to get your feedback.
So at this stage, here's the summary. So key things to point out. For getting to 2012 R2, like, there are lots of tools. It's really easy to do. It does take planning. This is our biggest thing that we tell people is, if you want to get to 2012 R2, please sit down, read the material, plan it out, and figure out what works best for you. For getting from 2012 R2 to 2016, it's much easier, and this is something that we're just going to continue to invest in. At this stage, we are going to open for questions, but I do want to let everyone know it's 1:44. If you're planning to get a shuttle back to your hotel, the shuttle stopped running in 16 minutes. So if anyone wants to just get up and leave, that's also fine. Thank you all for your time. Please make sure you fill out the evals and give us straight 5s, because we were here for the last session. Sorry, more to the... So he was asking about the issue with Virtual Machine Manager and the copy cluster role wizard. Do you want to step through that?
Right. So we know about the issue with Virtual Machine Manager.
He doesn't. He wants to know what the issue
So
is.
the issue is, if you use Virtual Machine Manager to create VMs, some of those VMs have a hard time with the import-export mechanism that's used by the copy cluster role wizard. So sometimes those VMs don't make it using copy cluster role wizard. The way to check if you're impacted is to create a test VM using SCVMM and check to see if you can migrate it across using the copy cluster role wizard.
Correct.
Right, and we're still trying to analyze why it works for some customers, but why it fails for others. So we're still investigating the issue.
Now, the key thing, and this comes back to the point I made, and a common mistake that people make is, you don't have to shut down the virtual machines in order to run the copy cluster role wizard. So this is actually really easy to test in an environment, is you can run the copy cluster role wizard while your VMs are running. And if we're able to create the roles on the other side and everything's happy, then you know you're not affected by that problem.
Right. So, but we believe that at the moment it's a small number of customers, and we're still looking to identify exactly what the issue is.
So yeah, and we've had lots of customers who've done it with no problem.
Exactly. So.
So again, another SCVM-related question. If you're using VM networks concept on SCVM, how does that?
So if you're using the network virtualization as the specific question, so that will work if you orchestrate it from the System Center console. And so that was one of the things I mentioned, is the System Center team is providing orchestration. So if you're using network virtualization using System Center, then what you're going to want to do is you're not going to want to follow the process that we just demoed. Instead, you're going to upgrade System Center to System Center 2012, and then you're going to go through System Center Virtual Machine Manager to do the upgrade. And they will make sure that all the network virtualization gets hooked up correctly in that environment.
What about not network virtualization, but just standard?
Standard networking, that all just works. That's all just magic. That's fine. Yeah, that one's no concern. If you're using the network virtualization, though, you absolutely must orchestrate that through System Center. VMs using VLAN IDs, that all just works. That's really simple. So we might,
Is there best practices having CSVs connected to two different clusters? So part of which R2, 2012 R2, it was showing that you connect the CSV to both clusters, we have the disks offline.
Yeah, so there's no problem with having it connected to both clusters. You can only have it online in one place. And if you try and online it, you'll get an error if you try and online it.
Actually, sometimes you don't get an error, and that's the problem.
And it depends on the storage, doesn't it?
Right, and it all depends on your storage topology and how it's presented up to the cluster.
Yeah, but it's actually, so one of the things, and we actually, this is just kind of, with storage spaces, you can actually have the same array connected to multiple clusters and different clusters talking to different spaces. And that's actually accepted and supported. One of the configurations we tested was actually having two different clusters connected to the same SAS JBOD, but using different disks in the JBOD. It's supported. There's a lot of interesting things you can do here, and this is why, the big thing, especially with 2008 R2 to 2012 R2 and 2012 to 2012 R2, the big thing that we say is plan, plan, plan. Think about the technique you want to use and just make sure you have a plan that you can execute on.
Putting it in a maintenance mode when you use the first cluster before adding it to the new one.
Yep.
Just best practices, just kind of
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it's happening both places.
Yeah.
What about SCVMM? Should you have both clusters in VMM while you're doing the migration? How is it going to detect other VMs, or should you do the migration, failover manager, and then port the new guy into VMM?
Honestly, both approaches work just fine. VMM won't detect that. VMM will see the virtual machines. So if you're using the copy cluster role wizard, VMM will see the virtual machines as new virtual machines. If you're doing the cross-version live migration, then it will actually see that is the same virtual machine. Even if you do the cross-version live migration outside of VMM. So we need to wrap up. People are antsy for us to get off of stage. So